Hi everyone, welcome to the final chapter of the semester. Congratulations on making it this far, which is chapter 20, which is about coastal processes and terrains. Originally I was going to record this in two short lectures, but I actually think I'm going to just do this in one slightly longer lecture, so we'll see how long it takes. But again, this is the last chapter. And so today we're going to talk about the erosional and depositional forces that happen on coasts and the type of landscapes that they form. So first we're going to talk about waves. So waves are mostly wind blown, right? You have big open oceans where wind is blowing across that ocean, lots less friction, less things to run into, so those wind speeds can get quite strong. And this includes swells are also mostly wind blown. And these waves will break near shore. So you can see on the diagram in the lower left, you have a wavelength that gets compressed as it gets near shore, which is kind of very similar to what we saw when we talked about tsunamis, but obviously this is a much smaller scale. And so as that wave gets compressed near shore, it will break on the coast in shallower water, right? So we can see here as that wave height gets compressed, the wavelength gets compressed, and then it will break near shore. And so shorelines exposed to open ocean have bigger waves. I grew up in Connecticut, which I've mentioned several times. The coast of Connecticut is blocked by Long Island. And because it's blocked by Long Island, the waves are very, very small. California, most of our coast is open to a really big open Pacific Ocean. So we have much, much bigger waves here than I did growing up. And so if you look here at global wave heights, some of the biggest waves globally are around those areas that are surrounded by really, really big ocean. And so just like other forces that we've talked about, waves weather, erode, transport, and deposit. So the stronger the wave, the more weathering and the more erosion, which is pretty intuitive, right? The more water and the stronger the water is that's crashing up against that shore, the more weathering and erosion it's going to have. When waves slow down or stop, then they're going to deposit that material. Just like when we talked about rivers, when rivers are running very strong, very forcefully, they are picking up more material. When they slow down, they are going to drop it off. And so a beach is just a depositional formation on the shoreline, right? As those waves have broken, they're going to drop some of that stuff here. And you could see this erosional landscape here. You have this rock that has eroded away on the bottom. It eventually will erode fully away and then collapse. But as these waves crash in, they're going to erode away more and more. We have much stronger waves on the West Coast. We are an erosional coast. On the East Coast, we have much shallower water. We have less stronger waves, and we are mostly a depositional coast. And so you can see here, here's an example of a sea notch or a cave, which is another erosional feature. As those waves are crashing along, it's slowly eroding away at that rock face, and you can see even inside of that cave lots of little pieces of deposited material. Next, we're going to talk about headlands and bay beaches, which is something that we are very familiar with in San Diego. And now the next time you stand on the shoreline, you should be able to pick out headlands and beaches. But basically, waves hit hardest at the headlands, which is where they're going to erode, right here. And then the waves slow down and refract as they head into these bays. And when those waves slow down, again, we have a slowing down that's happening, so we are going to deposit in these bay beaches. And so you can see here, here's La Jolla Shores Beach, which here is your bay beach. Here is your headland that's eroding away. And now we try to keep these things from eroding away. because we have structures on them and we don't want them to erode away. So beach erosion is a big problem in California because we've built stuff very, very close to the shore. So as that wave has slowed down, it's going to deposit that sand as a beach. And this leads to coastal straightening. So what's happening, much like fluvial processes are trying to flatten out the landscape, this coastal erosion wants to erode away these headlands and make a straight coast. And again, we're talking about like very large timescales, but these headlands are slowly eroding, and as human beings, we're constantly trying to keep that from happening. So here's another example at Sunset Cliffs, which is a really great example. So here's your headland. Here is a former headland that's mostly eroded. You have this guy that's left, and here is your bay beach, right? And so here's another vantage point. Here's somebody sitting on one of those headlands, and you have a bay beach in here. We also have arches and sea stacks. So headlands that get eroded on both sides will form caves, and those caves will connect to form sea arches. And so here is a sea arch, a picture I took in Hawaii. And then those arches will collapse and form stacks. Here's one in Ireland. Here's one in New Zealand. So you can imagine you had originally two caves, one on either side. Eventually those caves connected, formed an arch, and then eventually this arch part will collapse and you'll be left with the stack. And so here we can see, again, arches and stacks in Sunset Cliffs. Here's an arch, a smaller one. Here's an arch right here. And here, this was formerly an arch, but it has collapsed, and now you just are left with the sea stack. Now we're going to talk about beach drift. And so basically, while this sand is being deposited, it's also being pushed along the shore based upon the direction of that longshore current, or that current that is running along the shore. So those waves are eroding as they retreat, and they are depositing when they break, and they usually strike at an angle. So most of the time when you are at the shore, the waves are striking at an angle. So you see the wave is coming in this way. It's not striking totally perpendicular. Most of the time it's striking at some sort of angle. And that is a result of this longshore current, this current that is just running along. The water is flowing in this direction as it pushes along the shore. And so sand gets transported down the beach in the direction of the current. So you can imagine it's going to break, it's going to deposit some, but then as it retreats, it's going to get some sand back, and then it's going to deposit that sand up this part of the beach. It's going to retreat, and then it's going to deposit up a little further. It's going to retreat and then deposit it up a little further. And so you can imagine, again, because we have built structures so close to the shore, that we are very much trying to prevent beach drift in many cases. So we're going to look at some structures that you might see on beaches that you'll now be able to identify as ways that we're trying to prevent that beach drift from happening, because we've built these permanent structures. Some other longshore current formations is, so you have waves that are refracting into a bay, like I talked about before, and then sand gets deposited at that boundary between the beach and the bay, and the beach grows outward in front of the bay. So here's Sandy Hook, New Jersey, and so this beach is growing out in front of the bay. And this forms a thing called spits, which is a long sandy peninsula. You're going to be able to, after this lecture, watch a little time lapse of this spit and see how it's constantly adding at the north end. And so when a spit is adding on here, we know that the current is facing this way. So the spit faces the same direction as the longshore current. It's like a finger pointing at the direction of the longshore current. I want you to make note of that, because on your quiz, I'm going to show you a picture of the spit, and I'm going to ask you which direction the longshore current is flowing in. So you want to remember that spit is pointing at the direction that the water is flowing, right? Point in the direction of the longshore current. So just think of it as a finger that's pointing in that direction. And so when you get a spit that will connect the bay, you'll get something called a bay mouth bar. So you have a spit that is then connected across the bay. That bay is usually going to be connected to the open ocean by a tidal channel. It's not going to be totally cut off. You're going to have a tidal channel in the middle. And a tumbelow is deposited sand that connects an island to land. So you have, here's a tumbelow in Big Sur. This island was formerly disconnected, but rather than form a bay mouth bar, this spit eventually connected to an island and formed this tumbelow. And so we can look at San Diego and we can see how here's the direction of our current. And we've done a lot to transform this, but basically here is San Diego Bay. We have this former spit that's coming out here. That is then the bay is connected through this tidal channel right here. And so a lot of what we're worried about is coastal migration, so that tidal channel also will want to move in the direction of the longshore current. And so here is a picture from Mason Inlet in North Carolina, and we have, it's a little hard to see in these pictures, but there's a very, very fancy resort that was built right here. In '89, the tidal channel is up here, so it's got nice beachfront access. And you can see from 1990, it gets closer. From 1993, it's even closer. And then in 1995, it's basically right at the edge. And so what they have had to do is push this back, dredge this out, and increase the land here, because this eventually would just erode away into this resort. So we are constantly, again, trying to prevent all of this coastal migration and this coastal erosion where we've built structures. So you can see here, here's a picture, here's the edge of the hotel, and they have deposited a bunch of materials here, and they've moved the channel to be here. And this can be quite expensive. So when we build on shorelines like this, the maintenance can be very costly over the long run. And so here we can see an animation of that moving, that channel migrating south in direction of the longshore current, excuse me. So here's that resort, and it has moved south. So we do a lot of things to try to prevent this beach drift from happening, because it messes with our stuff. So we build structures on beaches to stop the movement of sand. The first type is a groin, which are these guys right here, and they usually look like little wooden structures. And we also use jetties. Right, so the jetties that you see at Ocean Beach and a lot of beaches are being used to maintain channels and prevent that drift from happening. We don't want that channel to move down. A lot of people think that jetties are these kind of like natural formations or confuse them with headlands, but we've built these jetties and they are ways to prevent that drift from happening. And so you can see here, here's another picture in San Diego, right? We have a jetty here, a jetty here. This channel here will naturally want to move in the direction of the longshore current, but we have a bunch of homes here, so we cannot do that. So we have maintained this harbor entrance. The coast of San Diego is a highly maintained system where we are constantly working against those natural forces. And you can see even there's a couple of groins right here on the beach to prevent that beach drift from happening, so that these people who are living here still have beachfront property. And if you look at a historical map of San Diego, you can see it looked quite different. If I can go back for a second to, right, we are maintaining that channel as opposed to this natural channel which would have just moved around a lot. Next, we're going to talk about barrier islands. Barrier islands are long, thin, sandy islands running parallel to shore. And these are sand that's deposited from offshore breaking waves. We don't have these on the West Coast. Here's a picture of them in outside of Corpus Christi, Texas. We have them in the Carolinas, but we don't have them on the West Coast here. So very common in certain shorelines, but not in the West Coast. On the East Coast of the United States, you have this very our shoreline kind of slopes very gently out to the ocean, so you get these waves that will break offshore and deposit these sands and make these barrier islands. And so these act as a barrier for these lagoons and sounds, right? And so when I talked about growing up in Connecticut with Long Island is a barrier island, really big one that blocks Connecticut. I grew up on something called Long Island Sound, and so when I would go to the beach, very, very small waves, very, very calm water. And just to say one more thing about this, you can imagine, again, barrier islands, especially on the East Coast, are really, really subject to hurricanes that will come through and potentially almost remove these islands and certainly cause them to flood, which is a big problem because we've had a lot of houses there, a lot of communities on these barrier islands. Some of them are very old. So you have people who've been living out there a long time who certainly do not want to move someplace else. I also want to talk about submerged versus emerged coast. And so submerged coasts are basically landscapes that were shaped above water, and then the sea level rose and filled that water in, right? So you have the landscape form first, the water coming second. Here's the Ria Coast in Australia. So you have a landscape that was formed by a river, but then that sea level rose after the last ice age, filling in that coastline, but it was not formed by that ocean water. Then you have emerged coasts, where you have waves that were waves shaped the sea floor, and then the crust was pushed up above the water by tectonic forces. So a landform that was previously underwater, and then it was pushed up. And here's a marine terrace in Ocean Beach. And so this marine terrace was actually formed underwater, and then tectonic forces lifted it up out of the water. So just remember, submerged formed first, then filled in with water, emerged formed underwater, and then is pushed up above the water. So again, Ria Coast, a submerged, this is in Marin County. You had rivers that carved valleys, and then the sea level rose, and then that valley filled in with salt water. And the result is you get a system of dendritic bays, which kind of look almost like little fingers and little veins, because it's not that typical bay like we were talking about before. It's something that was carved out by a river and then was later filled in by seawater. Another submerged coast is a fjord, if you've ever seen the movie Frozen, and if you have a little kid like I do, you probably have seen the movie Frozen. And in the movie Frozen, the fjords got frozen. So these are places that were heavily glaciated during the last ice age. We talked about glacial landscapes very recently, and so these only exist at high latitude coastlines, Northern Europe, in the Northern Hemisphere, New Zealand in the Southern Hemisphere. And so glaciers carved these U-shaped valleys, and then the glaciers melt, and the valleys get filled in, and you have these steep-sided long bays, like you see here, right? So this is salt water that's filled in here after those they're melted, but these landscapes were carved by glaciers before they were submerged. And again, to talk about those emerged landforms, you have wave-cut platforms and terraces. The San Clemente Island on the bottom is just a fantastic example of one. So the waves are basically scraping along the sea floor, flattening it out, and it creates this flattened rock, and then that flat rock emerges by tectonic action. And so on San Clemente Island, it looks like steps, right? You could see every step where it popped out of the ocean and got pushed up and got pushed up and got pushed up, right? But it's this series of flat landscapes that were flattened out when they were underneath water. And you can also see one here in La Jolla. So again, when you repeat that process of flattening, tectonic uplift, you wind up getting this step-like formation. The last thing we're going to talk about in this chapter is going to be coral reefs and atolls. So coral reefs, which you've probably heard a bit about and you're going to have to write about in your assignment, are these polyps that need warm, shallow, circulating water in order to survive. And they're really, really important. They're hugely biodiverse. They're a really good indicator of ocean health, and you're going to read more about them. But as the old reef breaks down, it forms new rock, and that new reef builds on top of that old reef. So it's like this, giant growing ecosystem. And so here's a picture of the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. This is in Moorea in the Pacific. Beautiful, beautiful landscapes. And if you've never seen a coral reef and you have the opportunity to snorkel at a coral reef or dive, I highly recommend it. You will see some amazing, amazing things. So when that reef, it's emerged, right, either from the sea level going down a little bit, but just from this coral reef constantly growing, you get new land. So the location of coral reefs, right, they're only in the tropics. So you can see here, somewhere between the Tropic of Cancer, it goes a little bit south of the Tropic of Capricorn and a little bit south of the Tropic of Cancer. But basically in the tropics is where we're going to find coral reefs. In the United States, we have some around Hawaii, but it's in Florida Keys, really, that we have our only coral reefs. And so we're going to talk about atolls. And so basically we've talked about volcanic islands, but you have a volcanic island that's formed. I'm going to show it to you in a few steps. So here's your volcanic island, and it is fringed by reefs. So because of that warm circulating shallow water and that around the island, you get this coral reef that forms. Then that central island erodes away. As you can see here, here is Bora Bora, which is going through that process. This island is eroding away, but this reef keeps building up around it. And then when that volcano is totally gone, what you are left is called an atoll. So again, here's another picture of Bora Bora, which is in that second stage where you still have this island here, but this island will eventually erode away, and all you will be left with is this atoll on the outside. And so the last thing I'm going to talk about is a country called Tuvalu. And so Tuvalu is an independent island nation in the South Pacific, consisting of entirely coral atolls. And so these islands have been inhabited for thousands of years. Excuse me if you can hear my neighbor sawing some wood out there. Hopefully you can't. So these atolls and islands have been inhabited for an exceptionally long time. A lot of them have experienced a certain amount of geographic isolation. So they have these very strong cultures and languages that obviously we want to preserve. In Tuvalu, the highest point in the country is about 15 feet above sea level, which you can imagine is not very high. Most of it is much lower. And so when you think about climate change and rising sea levels, Tuvalu is obviously going to experience a lot of that and already is. The sea level has already risen into the atolls quite a bit, and people there have noticed a big change in their lifetimes. So the sea level is rising. This country, there's a good chance it's not going to exist in about 100 years. And so you might wonder, like, how does the Tuvaluan economy operate? So again, it's very, very small. It's only about 15 feet above sea level at its highest point. And so you would think like tourism, possibly, but they actually cannot have tourism because there is no, it's such a small island nation that they can't land large jetliners there. They can only land very, very small ones, small airplanes, because they don't have a strip of land that's big enough to do that. So it's not just that you can't bring tourists in, but you also can't bring in what you need to build a resort for tourists to show up. They cannot grow much food there anymore because a lot of their water and their ground is getting inundated by salt water because they're so low with that sea level rise. So countries like this are often forced to import a huge portion of their food. So if you have a country where they can't make money from tourism, they can't make money from agriculture, and they have to import all of their food, these countries are having to get very resourceful with how they're making their money. And in the case of Tuvalu, they made their money off the internet. So most countries, not the US, have an internet extension for their addresses that reflects their country. So a website from France will have .fr at the end. I think Canada is .can or .cn. Tuvalu got .tv, and because .tv can be a popular website to have, website extension, they actually sell website addresses, and that is a huge portion of their economy right now, is just selling IP addresses for websites with .tv at the end of it. And so a lot of countries like Tuvalu who are living on these atolls, and I had an optional video for you that I couldn't make mandatory because it was there was no closed captioning. These are going to be the first real climate change refugees, and a lot of them are trying to buy property in other countries because they are recognizing the fact that they live on these atolls, they've lived here for thousands of years, but they're not going to be able to stay. So they're trying to figure out ways to permanently relocate their people into settlements where they can hopefully have a chance of preserving their culture and their heritage. So that is the end of this chapter and the final chapter of the semester, and the last time you're going to hear my voice. So congratulations for making it through the semester. Finish up your exercises, your quiz, and the close of course survey, which, by the way, I write in there, but you should know that survey at the end where you're giving me feedback, I can just see that you did it, but it is anonymous. So please be honest and constructive. I do use that feedback to try to improve on this course in the future. That's it. Thanks for listening.